I just want to let everybody know that we have interpretation services available if you need it. I'll hand things over to our interpreters to explain the process.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming. Special shout out to the news, I see so many of you here. If anyone needs help with interpretation for Spanish, Portuguese, or Arabic.
Right, we'll just wait a minute to get that set up and then we'll go ahead and get started. And if you haven't already, there is pizza in the back, there are samosas in the back, there are snacks, drinks. Feel free to help yourself throughout the evening. Don't be shy to get up and get food if you need it or take care of your business. And Lorraine, I'll just wait for the heads up from you.
We're good. I think I'll just
All right, cool. All right, good evening, everybody. I'm Tom Starowski. I'm the Chief of Planning and Community Development for the City of Revere. I'm really excited to talk with you tonight about Revere's Affordable Housing Production Plan. If you are here on a Wednesday night, you took time out of your busy schedule to talk housing with us, this probably shouldn't come as a surprise to you, but I want to put a fine point on this. We are in the midst of an affordability crisis here in Revere. It's not something that's unique to Revere. You know, it's certainly something we're seeing in cities and towns throughout the region, throughout the state, and throughout the country as housing gets more affordable and incomes aren't catching up with it. But I think what's unique in Revere is how quickly all this has happened. Really, in the blink of an eye, we've gone from a place that's really affordable for the average working person, the average working family, to a place that's not. And that's really what brings us here today, to think about what we can do about it. I haven't been in Revere for a long time yet, but in the time that I've spent here, I think one of the most unique things, one of the most endearing things for me about this city is the family-friendly orientation of it. I can't tell you how many people I've met in Revere that live next to their parents, that live next to their grandparents, who live next to their grandkids. And there's this real sense of community and family here in the city. And I think that's something that this affordability crisis is really putting in jeopardy. I wonder sometimes if that's something we'll be able to pass on to the next generation. I see a lot of young folks tonight, and I wonder, in the future, are they going to be able to rent? Are they going to be able to own a home in Revere? And that's really why we're here today, and that's the challenge we have in front of us. Before we get started, I want to thank Mayor Keith, who couldn't be here tonight, but authorized the creation of this plan and this whole process that we have in front of us. I want to thank the city councilors we have present, Councilor Novoselsky, Councilor Haas, Councilor Silvestri, and I feel like there was another councilor I'm missing. Oh, Carmillo, thank you. Come on, nice to see you. Thank you all for coming and appreciate your commitment to the work. We're going to need your help every step along the way. I also want to thank the project team that's here with us tonight. From Jay Goldstein, we have Noah Harper and Kelly Nace-Paz, who helped put together the content for this presentation, all the wonderful things you see outside, and are also going to be working with us to actually create the plan that will help us set some goals and strategies for how to achieve housing production in the city. And last but not least, I want to thank Lorena Escalero, who really put all the pieces together to make this possible, from the food, the childcare, the interpretation supports, just everything to make sure this event runs smoothly. And of course, the community liaisons and the youth and everybody that came here to provide support for this evening's event. So I appreciate you all coming out. And then two other groups I want to thank. Our Housing Production Working Group, which is a small group of interdisciplinary folks, community members, residents, stakeholders who are really committed to this work and serve as our sounding board to make sure that the goals and the strategies we create in this plan are really grounded in community. And if you're part of the Housing Production Plan Working Group, if you could just raise your hands for a moment. Thank you for your support today, and thank you for your support moving forward as we build this plan together. We're going to meet everyone in this room, not just those I mentioned, but everybody here tonight. We're going to start things off with a brief presentation. I promise that I'm going to try to be brief, I'll say. And then after that, we're going to have a chance to share some input out there in the lobby. And then we'll also talk about how you can get engaged moving forward, both through an online survey that we have, both online and paper copies of tonight, but also other ways to get involved. Because ultimately, the work doesn't stop today, it really starts today. And this is the beginning of a journey as a community, figuring out what we can do to build a better Revere, a Revere that has quality housing for folks across all income spectrums. So, at that, I'm going to hand things over to our team at Jane Goldson. I really appreciate you all coming out tonight and look forward to talking with you some more soon.
Thank you, Tom. So as Tom said, my name is Karen Mace. I tell people forensic names or full names. I am part of the Jane Goldson consultant team, and so I'm going to go ahead and start with some of the data that we put together to put this whole presentation through. So we did introductions. So we're going to go into Revere's housing needs and what that really looks like, the demographics, the housing, all these other good stuff. So we're here for housing production plan, but what is that exactly? By a show of hands, is anyone familiar or not familiar? No? Okay, that's okay. This is a learning opportunity for everyone. So a housing production plan is basically a guide that the town or municipality uses to think about how do we increase the opportunities for housing for the community. Are there affordable housing for folks? Are there a mix of housing types? Different types of housing needed. So those are the kinds of things that you think about, as well as pace. If there's a lot of development going on, how do we make sure that we're keeping up with that pace? So some of the reasons you might want to have a housing production plan is one, to, like I said before, control the pace, control the type of housing that you have in your community, but also the ability to control what kind of development comes in. So there's a term called friendly 40B, unfriendly 40B, and so having a 10% affordable list in your subsidized housing inventory for the town or the city allows you to say, you know, this development doesn't quite fit in with what we're looking for, so we're not sure we want to move forward with it. That gives you a safe harbor to say that once you get that 10% of the state requirement. So that's one of the reasons, and again, to address unmet need for low and moderate housing. So this kind of goes into what I said already, but from the 10% requirement that we have from the state, Revere is currently at 7%. So you need about 3% more to be like, we don't want the development, or it doesn't work with what we want, let's move forward. So there are 3 different parts of the housing production plan. There's a comprehensive needs assessment, which tells you these are the demographics in the community, this is the type of housing you have, this is the term of transportation, all of the resources you have available. Then there's the affordable housing goals. So after we put all the data together, we collect the feedback, we have information from the community to say, hey, these are our goals for housing, this is what we want to see in the next 5 years. And also implementation strategy. So we have our goals, but how do we make sure that we are actually implementing it and getting to our goals? And so that's what those implementation strategies are. So we'll go into the actual housing needs section now. So these are the different chapters for the housing needs assessment. So we'll be going over vision goals and strategies at some point later in the future, demographic characteristics, housing conditions, development considerations, and then also implementation capacity and resources. If I'm talking to anybody else, feel free to slow me down. I'll pass it on to Bill.
Hey everyone, so Cadmus and I worked on the sort of data analysis part of this, the less interesting but really vital looking at census data, looking at housing prices, seeing how they've changed in the past few years. I'm just going to cover briefly the demographic findings that we identified here. And none of this should come as a surprise, but Revere has been growing. 10,000 people over the past 10 years of our census. And the Massachusetts Department of Transportation has this complicated model that predicts how places will grow in the future. And they have actually identified another 18,000 people coming in and joining Revere in the next 20 years. So where is that growth going to go? How is that going to affect housing prices? How is it going to affect the city in the future? These are all the things that we're thinking about. And so we also looked at what's the median household income in Revere. So median is the 50% kind of line where 50% of households make more than that, 50% make less than that. Revere is at $73,041 and slightly lower than the metro area. The metro area is huge. That includes like Concord and even parts of New Hampshire. Drilling in, we looked at some closer examples too. So a lot of folks making in Malden and pretty similar here. Another fun part of this was looking at what are some common jobs held here and what are the median wages, so that 50th percentile kind of idea again. What is someone taking home each week when we look at the census data of like, what are people working? What are people doing? What are they earning? And then eventually applying that to housing prices and how are those things going. This is just weekly median wages and a fun thing to look at. And then also how have Revere's racial and ethnic makeups changed over the past 10 years. Revere is about 40% Hispanic or Latino, and that's a lot bigger than the state rate of 12%. And it grew remarkably in that 10-year period between the 2010 and the 2020 census at 84%. And now I'm going to pass it over to Tom, who's going to talk through housing and affordability.
Great, thank you. And nothing I'm going to share with you about housing affordability should really be a surprise. But rents are getting higher. Incomes are not catching up. This is rent since 2010 up to 2021, and you can see the median gross rent has been rising pretty consistently. And you see right at 2021, right around the pandemic, is where it really starts to spike. We don't have data after that, but I think you all know it's gone up even higher with inflation and wages where they've been at, which is pretty flat, pretty stagnant. It's becoming increasingly less able for the average renter to afford to rent in a year. And similarly with homeownership. The rents go up, the homeownership prices keep going up. And I had a young person tell me the other day, I wish I was born 10 years ago so I could actually afford to buy a home in Revere and afford to raise a family in Revere. And I think about that a lot when I look at slides like this, because home prices are only getting more and more expensive as wages really stay the same. And just to put this into perspective, I know I mentioned before different incomes, the average income for a worker in Revere. This is what you need to be able to afford a one-bedroom, a median price condo, and a median price single-family home in Revere. This is the weekly income required. Now I want to go back to that slide that Noah had just brought up before. None of those professions that we have, except for management occupations, can actually afford to rent or buy a home or a condo in Revere. And even a management occupation can afford a one-bedroom, but they can't afford to buy a condo, they can't afford to buy a home. This doesn't mean people don't rent, this doesn't mean people don't buy homes, but it means it's unaffordable. And it means they're spending much more of their income than they should on housing, and that's what this next slide shows. So 43% of existing households in Revere are cost burden. And the way we define that as planners is basically if you are spending more than 30% of your income on housing, that's like a standard that was developed 40 years ago in the Reagan administration, where they looked at really how much should the average person, should the average family be able to afford on their housing. You need money for your cable bills, you need money for utility, you need money for car payments. And so you can't spend all of your money on housing, but what is happening in Revere and in many places throughout the region is that a lot of folks are. Some folks are spending more than 40, 50%, and often even higher on housing. That means less money to spend on other things, basic necessities, needs, food, less money to spend on our local economies, supporting our local small businesses, and we are all kind of as a community spending way too much on housing. And so what do we do about that? There's really three key ways that we can help to support affordability in the city. One of them is by supply, by just building more housing across the board. And that's actually something we're really good at in Revere. We've built a lot of housing compared to the rest of the region. As you can see here, we've built or permitted over 5,000 new units since 2017. 95% of those were larger structures, more than 7 units, so a lot of the bigger apartment buildings you see on the beach or in Shirley Avenue, that really comprises the bulk of the new built or permitted structures. In terms of subsidy, that's another way we can support housing production by having housing that is actually restricted to become affordable. And that's through local, state, and federal government subsidies. So about 7% of Revere's homes are currently subsidized, as Caddy Mason mentioned before. The state requirement is 10%, so we're actually quite a bit below the state requirement. We have 117 affordable units built, under construction and permitted since 2017, and there's 72 more in the planning pipeline, which is actually really encouraging. We're seeing a lot of growth and movement, and I got to appreciate the City Council's efforts in this regard. As we've had new housing projects come up, there's a proposed project right now in the Lee Trailer Park that 10% of those units are proposed to be affordable. And coming up next month in front of the council is Overlook Ridge. The last phase of the Overlook Ridge project is proposing to create 15% affordable. In order to keep the pace with development and keep making sure we're building more affordable housing, we need to make those requirements, and we need to work with developers to make sure they're building across the income spectrum. And the last thing is stability. And the city offers several resources to support housing stability, and Lorena will talk about that in a minute. But I guess we can just run through a few quick details for each of those, both subsidy, supply, and stability. So again, I won't belabor the point. We've built a lot, we've permitted a lot, but not much of it has been affordable. So based off of what's been constructed or permitted or built, it's only 2% that's been affordable. If you consider those things in the pipeline that I referred to earlier, it's a little bit better. We're making progress. We're up to 8%. It's progress, but it's not enough. And when you consider subsidized housing, I won't belabor the point. We're at 7%. 99% of that is rentals. So we basically have one condo that's affordable in the city. One. So if you are looking for affordable home ownership, you really can't look in Revere because we don't have many options. And to meet our 10% target, we need to build 718 units to reach that target. And that's just the state's minimum requirement. And just a reminder, I know Caddy Mace mentioned, but if we aren't at 10%, what a developer can actually do, they haven't done it before, but they could, is come into the city and say, Revere's not at 10%. We're actually going to work around your local rules that say how high you can build, how dense you can build, how much parking you're required to have, because you need more housing that's affordable. And if they include at least 25% affordable units in their development, they can work around our local rules and regulations, and they can work with the state. So that's definitely something we're vulnerable to by not meeting our 10% goal. And then stability programs and referral processes, I'll hand it over to Wendy to discuss that.
So I know that the focus of tonight is on the housing production plan, but I thought it would be good to mention the city housing resources that are available for folks. Since September 2023, the City of Revere hired a public agency called Housing Families to be able to provide various resources for residents, including rental assistance, eviction prevention services, help moving out, relocating, among others. And so the first step is to get in touch with either one of our community liaisons who is here. Maddie, if you want to stand up for... Oh, you're already so that's Maddie Pineda, and she does the initial intake for residents and makes appointments with housing family staff. Or you can also get in touch with Nicole Palermo, our Revere social worker. Her email is npalermo@revere.org. Her number is 781-629-4158. And for homelessness resources, there's a different person to reach out to that's in the Substance Use Disorder and Homelessness Initiatives office. And if anyone needs help with that, you can get in touch with me and I can help you connect with Carrie Ann, who is our director, who works in the Substance Use Disorder Homelessness Initiatives as a direct service coordinator.
There's only one person, so I'm just gonna go.
Great. Thank you, Lorena. So after we're done with the presentation, we go outside to talk about ideas, and I want you all to think about those three things: supply, affordability, and ultimately what we can do to provide stability to folks that need it. Those are really the three-pronged approach that we need to develop affordable housing and develop housing that's affordable for everyone in Revere. And development considerations, I'll be quick here, but one of the things that's holding us back from development is our zoning, which is our local rules and regulations that say what you can build, where, and how high, and how much parking you need, all that kind of stuff. Our zoning is pretty outdated. This is a map that's pretty small, but anything in red are existing buildings that actually wouldn't be allowed to be built today because of our zoning. So our zoning says that your lot sizes need to be much larger than many of the lot sizes in Revere often are. Our zoning says you need a certain amount of parking that often homes don't have. Our zoning says that you need 100 feet of frontage, so your front lawn basically needs to run 100 feet along the way, and many homes don't. So zoning is one big barrier to development in Revere. And we can go to the next slide. Improvements have been made. We recently passed accessory dwelling unit, what often folks call in-law suites or granny flats perhaps. The ability for folks with a single-family home to actually add a small addition to their home to allow for folks to have an additional housing unit and to offer additional income for those homeowners. So that's something we recently passed. We also have infill provisions that say if you fall under certain criteria, you can actually build on a smaller lot and you don't have as stringent of requirements. And we also just passed, with the support of the City Council, 2 smart growth zones in the city. And those are zones, one in Shirley Avenue, one in the Lee Trailer Park, that says you can be super flexible with what you build and how much parking is required because A, you are near a transit facility, so you don't need as much parking, and B, you have at least 20% affordability. And that's really a critical piece for being able to qualify for that zoning. You need that 20% affordable. So we've done some good things, but we have a lot of work to do, and we have a lot of work in front of us. And the other thing that's sort of a consideration and a constraint that we can't do anything about, or we can do some things but not everything, is climate change. And you can see on the map here, even if you can't read the legend, everything that's blue means that it has the potential to be underwater during a high precipitation, high storm event. So that makes building housing more expensive in Revere. You're probably looking at some of those areas in blue and thinking, well, we've got a lot of housing there. How's that happening? It's happening. It's just happening in a lot more expensive way. Basically, we need to build housing that's resilient. We need to build housing that can withstand storm surges and do all the things that are needed to build resilient housing. But it costs a lot more, and it makes it more difficult for us, frankly, to build affordable housing. And now I will pass back to Kevin Nix.
Thank you, Tom. So the implementation capacity and resources slide, this really talks about how can the department that's entrusted to do this work do the work? Do they have the capacity? Are there any things that they need to do that? And so here with the little slash, or the lines here, it's limited planning staff capacity means there's not enough staff to really get all the work done. Lack of Community Preservation Act. That's one of the programs that uses a lot of funds, and part of the funds is for affordable housing besides environmental concerns and historical preservation. There's also a lack of inclusionary zoning ordinance. Inclusionary zoning helps to create affordable housing, and Revere doesn't have one. I know that at some point in the past, you guys were hoping to pass inclusionary zoning ordinance, but that didn't quite happen. So that's something that would have helped also with some of the built affordable housing, but also for the funding. And some of the good things that are here is you do have an affordable housing trust fund, which means that you do have a funding source for creating affordable housing. There's short-term rental ordinance. This helps to create a sort of barrier for folks who may be abusing short-term rentals that may be taking some housing off of the market for folks who are living in family units or even single-family dwellings. There's a smart growth district, so again, you have that idea of how to really build the way you want to. And then growing state support, so you have the support from the state that we need more affordable housing, we need more variety of housing types. So there's a lot of negatives, but there's also a lot of positives. And of course, as Michael said, make sure to advocate through the council, make sure to advocate through the mayor, so all these things can be a part of the planning process as well. So we've reached the end of the presentation portion. Phew. Any questions anyone has about this? And for anyone who came in a little later, feel free to approach any of us and help sort of catch you up on what we were talking about earlier. But any questions thus far right now? Yeah, Thor.
I have a question, Tom, I think. I'm not sure I understood. I think you were talking about the overlay district, and you were talking about the trailer park being one of them, and that requires 20% affordability.
So Laura had asked if Lee Trailer Park was one of the smart growth districts, and I mentioned that it is. In order to take advantage of that zoning, you need to build at least 20% affordable. And I'm sure you're asking, the point of the question is, there's a development in front of the City Council today that is at the Lee Trailer Park that's not using that zoning. When you have an overlay district, it's basically an option, it's a bonus that says if you build at least 20% affordable, you can take advantage of this bonus option and you can get additional relief and flexibility from the city, less parking requirements, you can build higher up, you don't need as big of a lot size, all that good stuff. But ultimately, it's an option, not a requirement, and the developer chose the other option of going in front of the City Council for a special permit.
One of the items I heard you say was we're going to allow the addition of ancillary units or in-law apartments or grand flats. Now, 50% of the units in there are not owner-occupied. Are we allowing people who just rent out their buildings to add ancillary units to just increase the number of units they can rent out even if they don't live there?
That's a good question. So if somebody wants to build a brand new flat or what we call an accessory dwelling unit apartment, you do need to own a home and it needs to be owner occupied. So that's a big concern that we heard throughout the process. Is actually before my time. But a lot of communities as they're dealing with this is if you let people do this, are they just going to rent both of the units out? But it is a requirement in Revere that you actually live in the unit. As long as you are, you can then rent the other one out. Any question? Any other questions? Yes.
I know you mentioned climate change, and I was just curious to know any resilience initiatives that the city does, or if there's any mitigation projects in terms of what was previously shown, especially on the coastal line.
No, thank you for asking that. I totally glossed over that as we were presenting, but I said that there's nothing we can do about that, which isn't true. We can do a lot, we can't do everything. But actually, housing is a great opportunity for us to make sure we are more resilient as a community. So one great example is in the Riverside neighborhood, where, right off of the General Edwards Bridge, as you're crossing through from Lynn to Revere on the right-hand side, you can see that large housing unit going up. There's about 291 units of housing there. Not about, there is. And because of that development, we've been able to unlock about $10 million in state and federal investment that we wouldn't have gotten if there wasn't the housing there. And we're using that to make Gibson Park, which is the park next to the development, more resilient. So for example, the all-purpose field that we're going to be building there will have underground stormwater storage. So when floods happen, there's going to be tanks underground that will be able to hold a lot of that water. We are building a vegetative berm, which is basically like an earthen wall all along Mills Ave, because if you saw a few weeks ago during those high precipitation and king tide events, that whole neighborhood was flooded. And we're building in resiliency solutions that we wouldn't have had before. And then a lot of the developments along the beach have to work through a pretty rigorous state permitting process that, for example, they can't build on the first floor. They have to elevate the property and allow for waves in the event of a large event to kind of flow through the property. So it actually can be a great way to make us resilient by building more housing. It unlocks a lot of resources we wouldn't have otherwise. Great question. Thanks. Any other questions? Great. Should we just go to the end here? Yeah, so please share your input as you're walking out. That includes you young folks. We want to make sure we're hearing from everybody here tonight. And please spread the word about our survey. You can scan the QR code here, click on the link when you get the PDF. Yes, Rafa? You have a question, right? Oh, I do have a question. Great. Let's see. Thank you.
Would this help, for the students who graduated would it help them to support the housing plans if they would be working like underpaying jobs?
Absolutely. I mean, that's all of this work, this planning work is, I'm not thinking a year ahead, we're thinking 10, 15, 20 years ahead. Ultimately, when you guys are old enough to raise a family and buy a home, we want to make sure that we have enough housing, we have to make sure it's affordable so you can afford to continue to live, rent, or own a home here in Revere. So absolutely. Which is why I want you all to make sure your voices are heard both outside and in the surveys. So please share with your friends. We want to hear about your experiences with housing in the city. And finally, we're going to have a plan in spring that all this input's going to go somewhere, and that's where it's going to go. We're going to create some goals and strategies that's going to help guide the work we're doing. So please keep that in mind. It's not just a survey to take a survey, but it's building towards something.
I have someone that's asking a question here. The median income was 80% for the Lee Trail Park. Why wasn't that 60% as the average in Massachusetts?
So the way affordable housing is defined at the state is it's at or below 80% of the area median income. So that's really a municipal decision how we want to set those limits. The lower you go, the more affordable the housing is. We need to actually pony up as a city or provide state resources or other resources to help make sure it makes the numbers work for developers. So in this case, 80% is sort of the bare minimum, to be sure, and we have a need for even more affordable housing than that. But it's also something that we have to support and put our kind of money where our mouth is. Good question.
So before we end, I do want to explain the activities outside very quickly. So there are a couple of boards that have data on them, or just information about what this process is. Read it at your own leisure, that's totally fine. The most important thing is that you answer the questions on the board. So there's a couple of boards that have demographic information, so it asks you whether you're a Revere resident, what your age range is, how long you've been in the city, also things about like what you think are the biggest challenges for housing, what opportunities you see. So please make sure to answer those and then take your time reading the other parts. And then of course that link is also on a different board there, so you can take the survey. And the survey is just another way for you to participate and provide feedback. And encourage your friends, your networks to take that as well. And even if they're not from Revere or have like a job interview or anything, it's good to see folks who have another sort of relationship with the city and what they think about the city and what they sort of notice about it. So that's sort of the process outside, but that's pretty much all we have for you tonight. There's also food outside. Please feel free to grab the food and approach any of us if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.